really a joy to be with you all today. I'm going to start sharing my screen so that I can share slides. I don't normally speak with slides, so I'm afraid my slideshow is pretty paltry. But for those who like images, I have a few images here. So I myself am not an alcoholic. I'm what Father Ed would call underprivileged. Father Ed was also underprivileged. He called himself underprivileged because as he came to know AA and the people of AA, his ministry to and with AA was the great joy of his life. Even though once he became involved in AA, he continued his work with other groups, including with the Cana Conference, which was a group that he was involved with, helping married couples to deepen and enrich their marriage. And he also was involved with Recovery Incorporated, now known as Recovery International, which is for people who suffer anxiety and other nervous disorders. And he also had his work as a Catholic priest, as a speaker on proportional representation, which is a form of democracy that our Irish participants will know very well. Even though he kept doing all these things from 1940 onwards, when he discovered AA, until his death in 1960, the joy of his life was participating in AA. And he didn't consider it a one-way ministry. He didn't think of himself as this great, person from on high reaching down to members of AA. Really, from the moment he discovered it, he felt in some way that he needed AA. Even as a non-alcoholic, he needed it for his life, for his ministry. He considered himself underprivileged because he felt that the AAs had the kind of fellowship that everyone in the world should have. His work, he took the AA model and he brought it into his work for the church, his work with married couples. He was the first person to really champion the 12 steps for everyone seeking to better themselves, and not just for alcoholics. He felt that it wasn't fair to humanity to limit the 12 steps just to AAs, that we all need them. He used the 12 steps in his own life to stop smoking. And with regard to AA, early in AA's existence, when meetings were hard to find unless you were in the know, when Father Ed would travel, he would write to the central office and ask where the AA groups were in the places where he was traveling to, because there was an understanding between him and the central office that he could go to any meeting, even those that were closed, and participate. And in one letter that he wrote to the central office, he said, "I have been shamelessly using AA as a lonely hearts club." He wanted that fellowship. He needed that fellowship. And, that love was completely returned because members of AA, they knew of his great friendship and spiritual sponsorship of Bill Wilson, and they also just could see and feel and hear the love that Father Ed had for them, and his deep understanding of the steps. Before I begin to tell you more about Father Ed's story, I just want to clarify something in the title where it says the story of Bill W., spiritual sponsor. AA members will sometimes say, wasn't Ebby Bill's sponsor? How can you say that Father Ed was his sponsor? And it's true that Bill Wilson, who co-founded AA with Dr. Bob, that Bill credited his friend Ebby with being his sponsor, because it was Ebby who, being a member of this Protestant group called the Oxford Group, introduced Father Ed to, first of all, the possibility that it was possible for Bill to stop drinking, and also Ebby introduced him to certain principles that Bill would integrate into the 12 steps that he composed that are at the heart of how the AA program works. For anyone here who's new to the 12 steps, basically a sponsor is someone who is experienced in working the 12 steps, which are the heart of the AA program, and who helps someone who is less experienced or who just needs some extra help. So whereas Ebby was technically Bill's sponsor, at least towards the beginning, there were a few people whom Bill at different times called his spiritual sponsor, because they were non-alcoholics who helped him to better live the spiritual principles that are at the heart of the steps. And Father Ed was the one whom Bill most often referred to as his spiritual sponsor, because Father Ed deeply understood the spirituality behind the steps for reasons that I'll explain. So during the rest of this talk, for about the next 35 minutes, I'm going to share with you Father Ed and his friendship with Bill Wilson and his influence on AA. And I'm going to share it from the perspective of hitting bottom. So those of you who have worked the steps or have spent time in the rooms, you know the experience, or about the experience of hitting bottom. And Father Ed's point of greatest empathy with members of AA was that he himself, although not an alcoholic, had that experience of hitting bottom. So I'm going to talk about Father Ed's hitting bottom, and then his encounter with Bill at a time when Bill, although no longer drinking, was hitting a kind of bottom. And then I'm going to talk about how their work together, Father Ed and Bill, bore fruit for AA. So first, some quick facts about Father Ed. These are just some basic biographical outlines. You can see a picture of him there at the far right. He's the oldest of five kids. The brother who's closest to him in that picture, his brother James, would die at the age of 15 in the 1918 flu pandemic. So that was a great tragedy for young Edward Dowling, and that was very likely one of the sources of personal bonding that he had with Bill, because Bill also had experienced great loss early in life. As I note here, Father Ed, we just had his 121st anniversary of his birth, born in 1898, died in 1960. He died practically on his feet. He had been, at the age of 23, hit by a very serious form of arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis that crippled him, required him to walk with a cane. Towards the end of his life, he was sometimes using a wheelchair. And when he was in his early 30s, the doctor's advice to him was to move to climate like New Mexico if he wanted to live a full life, and to get out of St. Louis, which at that time was the most polluted city in the country. But Father Ed simply ignored the doctor's advice. I don't advise everyone myself to do that. I think it's generally a good idea to listen to doctors on extending life. But for Father Ed, he had by then totally given himself over to his Jesuit vocation, to his priestly vocation, and he felt that wherever there were people with problems, he wanted to be there. And that's why even towards the end of his life, as he became increasingly crippled and as he had heart attacks and other effects of his disease, he continued to tour and give talks. So when he was in Memphis, he died in his sleep the night before he was to give a talk to married couples. And as I mentioned here, he lived in St. Louis nearly all his life. Really loved St. Louis, also loved being in the middle of the country. It was, he traveled mostly by train. He had a fear of flying that he overcame only towards the end of his life with the help of the group Recovery Incorporated and their principles for people suffering from anxiety. So St. Louis was a wonderful central place for him to travel from as he gave talks around the country. So now I want to get into Father Ed's hitting bottom. And for this, I'm going to show you a photo of him as he was in the Jesuit novitiate, which is the 2-year trial isn't quite right, but it's the first 2 years when a person becomes a Jesuit, when they are becoming familiar with the Jesuit way of life, and they are being tested by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, and they are themselves testing their own vocation in the society. So Father Ed, I don't know if I can, I probably can make this a bit larger. Let's see. Oh, good, I can. Okay, so let's see if I can now bring this. There we go. So Father Ed is at the very left-hand side standing. And as you can see in this picture of him with his fellow Jesuit novices, well, Father Ed here he's not yet father, he's just in training. He's 22 years old. This is towards the end of his 2nd year in the novitiate, a few months before he's to decide whether to make his first vows. And in this picture, you see him looking fairly bit tense, a bit wound up. And you also see him not quite part of the group. You know, if you zoom out and you look at the group, what you see is that, generally they're standing pretty close together, and young Edward Dowling is the only one who's almost completely away bodily from the group. And that says something about where he was emotionally during his time in the novitiate. He did not feel that he belonged there, and that was a great trial for him emotionally. Prior to entering the Jesuit novitiate, he had gone for a large part of his life not believing that he was called to religious life or to the Catholic priesthood. He initially had thought that baseball was his career. He was a baseball star in high school, and in a star player in high school and in college at St. Mary's College in Kansas. He went to Jesuit high school, Jesuit college, and while in college, he tried out for the Chicago White Sox. He was told he wasn't ready. He tried out for at least one other team and was told he wasn't ready. So then he, upon leaving college, spent a year as a newspaper reporter in St. Louis, and he loved it, and the newspaper loved him. They started him off at a very low salary because he was desperate to work there, but then they tripled his salary within his first year to something that was a living wage for a young man in St. Louis, because they saw that he was very good at what he did. But much to the shock of his newspaper colleagues, he decided to try his vocation as a Jesuit. So he entered the Society of Jesus in 1919 when he was just turning 21. But at the age of 21, he was what was considered an old vocation. If you look at, some of these other men, they are almost all younger than Edward. I mean, even if you look at the man who's just right next to him, you can see a significant difference in age. The one next to him just looks like standing next to him just looks like a kid. And Father or young Edward Dowling was he was torn during his time in the novitiate, because he, on the one hand, felt that God was calling him to this Jesuit life, but at the same time, he just kept feeling like he didn't belong. He just didn't fit. It was a very regimented life. It was highly disciplined, and young Edward Dowling was not a highly disciplined person. He liked to sleep late. He liked to. He wasn't really. He wasn't really knowledgeable or practiced in things like the rather military and regimented table manners, and then there were all of these other rules that the Jesuits had, such as not making eye contact with people, practicing what they called custody of the eyes. They could make eye contact when shaking hands, hello, and then after that they were supposed to focus on the middle distance, because they were I'm not quite sure why that was, but it was to somehow keep themselves a bit kind of in the world, but not of it. And Edward Dowling was very much a people person. He loved people. He wasn't allowed to, men weren't allowed to hug or touch each other, even like slapping each other on the back in the Jesuits. So for someone from a very warm, friendly Irish family, this was really tough. The one thing that Father Ed felt might make him feel that he belonged was if he could get a strong message from God in prayer that God was going to give him the grace to do this. And where he started to feel that encouragement from God was while making the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius, which every Jesuit makes during their first year of the novitiate for 30 days. It's a 30-day retreat where they engage in prayer meditations, where they imaginatively walk with Jesus through the different events, what Catholics call the mysteries of his life, death, and resurrection. And through this experience, if they're called to the society, they'll feel in some way a personal encounter where they'll be conscious of their sinfulness, their need for grace, and they will come to trust in the availability of God's grace for them to strengthen them in the path of life that they're called to live. So these spiritual exercises were really the one thing that gave young Edward Dowling some encouragement. And by the time he had made the spiritual exercises in his first year, and he was in his second year, he felt that he still wasn't sure if he was going to make his vows at the end of his second year. So he begged his spiritual director in the novitiate to grant him permission to make the exercises a second time with the second year of novices that were coming in. And this was unheard of. I mean, it was not in the plans of the founder of the Jesuits and the author of the spiritual exercises, St. Ignatius Loyola. It was not in his plan that novices would make the 30-day spiritual exercises twice. But amazingly, Father Ed's novice director agreed to let him make the spiritual exercises a second time in his second year. And so that's kind of where you see young Edward in this photo. You see him having made the spiritual exercises a second time. But even then, it took him until the very last minute to make the decision to make his first vows, about 3.5 months after this photo. And he wrote in a letter to his sister that I quote in Father Ed, that he came to see that each person is called by Jesus to take up their cross and follow Jesus. And he came to see that being a Jesuit was this not just daily cross, because each of us is called to take up our cross daily, but he saw that being a Jesuit would be a cross that he would take up daily for life. And, this sounds, when you think about taking up a cross, taking up something hard and difficult, it sounds like who would want to do that for life? But if it's Jesus who's offering it to you as a special way to gain intimacy with Jesus and be like him, then it becomes attractive, because you know that the person who's offering you the cross, Jesus, loves you and wants what will make you happy, and that somehow over the course of taking up your cross, you will, over the course of a lifetime, become happy. And so Father Edward, because he made his decision to enter the Jesuits and take up this great life cross at the last minute, he took the saint's name Dismas for his vow name. So every Jesuit, not every Jesuit, but most Jesuits will take the name of some saint as like a second name upon taking making their first vows. And Dismas is the name traditionally given to the good thief, the thief who got into heaven at the last minute, saying to Jesus as they were being crucified together, "Remember me, Lord, when you come into your kingdom." So Edward Dowling felt very much like an 11th hour vocation. So after he made his first vows, he had this time of great joy. And it was during that time, just a few weeks after making his vows, that he started to feel the pain in his leg that was the beginning of his disease. So that started at the age of 23. By the time he was in his early 30s, he was needing to walk with a cane. So he received, sort of in exchange for this emotional cross that was at least partly lifted from him when he made his vows, he received a physical cross that he carried all his life. And yet anyone who met him would say that he carried it with great joy. And he didn't let people tell him that he oh, you must be in pain. He didn't want the focus to be on him. Here's, let's see, I think I've gotten out of, there we go. Let me zoom out here. This is a letter that he wrote to his sister Mary. It's an excerpt of a letter. His sister Mary became a nun. She was considering, I think, becoming a nun when he was writing to her. So this is a couple of years before his Jesuit ordination, while he's still preparing for ordination. He wrote to his sister with advice on prayer, and he writes, "Nobody can do better than they can do. In matters like prayer, etc., the effort is what we give to God. The success is what he gives to us. Prayer, etc., without the pay of success is more unselfish and unselving." Edward Dowling liked to come up, as a former journalist, he liked to come up with catchy words. So if a word didn't exist for something, he would coin it, like unselving. I think that those of you who are familiar with the spirituality of the steps can see that in this spirituality of surrender that young Edward Dowling, S.J., picked up from the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, he's coming at a path that is very like the path of surrender that was followed by the Oxford group, and that Bill W. As well as Dr. Bob would take this spirituality of surrender into the 12 steps. This idea that that there's even when that the point of prayer is not just to feel good, it's to become less selfish. It's to realize that that I am not God, and to grow in trust of God. Here's next a picture of Father Ed, ordained June 1940 at the Queen's Work, which was where he came to work in St. Louis after his ordination. Because of his journalistic background, he was able to get a position as an associate editor at the Queen's Work, which was a publishing apostolate, a publishing ministry of the Jesuits. And you can see here he's cutting articles, he's clipping articles from papers. He was very interested in politics. He was a sort of an amateur sociologist, and he was considered to be tops in his field, even though he didn't have a doctorate. He was accepted in some of those same circles because of all the independent research that he had done. So, that was one of the reasons why Bill was impressed with him intellectually, because Father Ed had this great expertise in areas like democracy, proportional representation, how democracy works. And as I write in Father Ed, some of the ideas that Father Ed had about democracy, Bill incorporated when Bill was working on the government the organizational structure of AA. Father Ed had an expression: leadership should be on tap, not on top, and that was most definitely incorporated into AA. This idea of servant leadership. So in this office that you're seeing at the Queen's Work in St. Louis, Father Ed would sort of hold court, although he wouldn't like such a grand term. But I mean, you see him here. He looks like he's leaning forward, but it's actually because he's crippled. You can kind of see that his hands are arthritic. His spine by this point is calcified, so he can't actually move his neck. He joked that he was becoming his own tombstone. He had a wonderful lightheartedness about it that you can see in his expression here. So, I would say, Father Ed wouldn't say that he would sort of hold court in his office. People would line up who had problems because they sensed that here was someone who could sympathize with their problems and who could also help them in a practical way, give them practical advice. He wouldn't just send them away with a prayer. He would both pray for them, and if they wanted problem solving, he would help them with that. More than one person has said that if you don't have a problem, Father Ed will find you slightly boring. So it was 6 months after, actually at the time of this photo, this is 6 months after his discovery of AA and 5 months before he met Bill. So Father Ed learned of AA from an alcoholic whom he was assisting as a priest for people with problems. he was having that reputation, he was contacted by someone close to a Chicago newspaper reporter named, I've been permitted to, by the daughter of this reporter, to breach his anonymity. The reporter's name was Edwin Leahy, and his alcoholism was so bad that he was at the verge of getting fired, and his wife had gone off to live with family and taken their 2 kids. So Father Ed was called in by someone close to the family to bring this couple back together. And in January of 1940, Father Ed succeeded in reuniting the couple in his office and sending Edwin away with a promise not to drink. And at that time, that was all he could do, try to extract a promise from Leahy not to drink, because AA had yet to take off nationally. This was more than a year before the article in the Saturday Evening Post that would draw national attention to AA. So at this time, there were only a few AA meetings. It was in New York, Akron, Chicago, Cleveland, and I think maybe 1 or 2 other places. There were not a whole lot of members at this time, and prior to AA, there was nothing that had been shown to really work. There were some extreme types of treatments for alcoholics, such as even electroshock therapy, but AA was the first program to give hope, truly give hope to alcoholics. So Leahy, when he went back to Chicago, he found that some of his co-workers who were alcoholics, one named Luke H., another Clem L., had become part of the local chapter of Alcoholics Anonymous. So when Father Ed went to visit Leahy a month after reuniting Leahy with his wife, Father Ed was really happy to find that Leahy was still sober, that he was not drinking. But Father Ed was a little concerned to find that Leahy said that he was spending time with his former drinking buddies in this group called Alcoholics Anonymous. And when Father Ed expressed concern, Leahy invited him to come to a meeting. So Father Ed came to the meeting, and as I write in Father Ed, I found an article written by Father Ed on his first experience of this AA meeting. So I was able to use his own words. When he first walked into the meeting, I think the nicest thing that he could, say about it was that, to him, it looked like the family entrance to Skid Row. But then he writes, the stories began, and he writes, so did his amazement. And he says that ever since then, he's been transfixed by the stories of AA, and it's the greatest drama in America today. That's what he wrote. He wrote that in a magazine a magazine for Catholic teenagers, the Queen's Work, in 1944, I think. I might have the date wrong, but it's correct in my book. So, once Father Ed discovered AA, wherever he went, he started to publicize it, and he helped found, I should say, the first AA group in St. Louis. And he was particularly intrigued by the similarity between these principles of recognizing that one has that one is desperately in need of God's grace and surrender, and the whole in the steps, like step 4, step 5, these steps in the 12 steps of recognizing one's faults, and then what the steps call a fearless inventory of one's failings, and and then admitting those failings and asking God to remove them. With the help of another Jesuit, a Jesuit who was an alcoholic, Father John Marcoux, Father Ed saw the parallels between these principles that were parallels to the spiritual exercises of Saint Ignatius Loyola. And because he had such a great love of the spiritual exercises, that intrigued Father Ed even more. And so he decided he had to meet this great Ignatian master, Bill Wilson, to find out, how Bill had come to condense the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius into these 12 steps. So Father Ed in November 1940 went to the AA clubhouse where Bill and Lois were then living in New York. And at this time, there had been 5,000 copies printed of the first edition of the big book. And most of those 5,000 copies were still gathering dust in a warehouse because Bill had counted on this press from Reader's Digest that hadn't happened. And at the time when Father Ed arrived, Bill was taking Jack Alexander from the Saturday Evening Post through the rooms. And at this point, early in Jack Alexander's research of AA, Jack wasn't buying it. He thought that the AA members whom Bill was showing him were these Broadway actors being paid to say that they had been drunks and were now sober. So Bill was feeling extremely frustrated at the time that Father Ed found him. Bill later said that he was on a dry drunk. And so Lois was out when Father Ed hobbled up the steps to Bill's room at the New York clubhouse on that night, November 1940. And Father Ed sat himself down and leaned on his cane and said to Bill, I'm very interested in the connections between your 12 steps and the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. And Bill just, grumpily said, never heard of him. And Father Ed laughed. And then, as Bill would later say, he looked in Father Ed's eyes and he just, I'm paraphrasing here, but Bill saw this great love, and Bill felt what Bill sensed was the movements of grace. Bill said that he felt that there was this light emanating from Father Ed. And Bill later said that was when he took his fifth. He took the fifth. He made his fifth step with Father Ed that night. Now, you might ask, well, Bill wrote the 12 steps. Wouldn't he have already made the fifth step by then? And the answer is that even though Bill wrote the 12 steps, he hadn't actually made them at the time that he wrote them, because he was encapsulating in the steps the wisdom of the first 100 members of AA and the wisdom of the Oxford group. So this is one of the reasons why Bill called Father Ed his spiritual sponsor, that Father Ed helped him to live the steps more deeply. And it was in that meeting when Bill, confessing his frustration to Father Ed, said to him, well, as he was speaking of his frustration that AA hadn't taken off, Father Ed responded to him, "Blessed are they who hunger and thirst." And Bill said to him, "Won't there be any satisfaction?" And Father Ed just said, "No, never." And Bill realized in this conversation that was in fact good news, that he wasn't supposed to expect to be totally fulfilled and have his thirst totally satisfied in this life. What Father Ed impressed upon him is that we are meant to thirst, that thirst is not an evil, bad thing in itself. It can be a good thing if we are thirsting for what's above rather than thirsting for what's below, even thirsting for something that seems like a good thing, like, Bill was thirsting that AA would take off and he would dry up all the drunks in the world. Even that is, Bill realized through Father Ed's ministry to him, even that thirsting for something seeming good was still directing his thirst at something that was less than his higher power. It says in the gospel, seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added to you. So that was really what Father Ed impressed upon Bill, that Bill should direct his thirst towards his higher power and the grace that he needed for each day. And then in Bill's encounters with alcoholics, Bill would experience a certain satisfaction, a certain foretaste each day of the complete relief from thirst that he would find in heaven. So this is an excerpt from Bill's recollection of a visit that he made the following year to St. Louis in 1940, the summer of 1941. And here he describes how the St. Louis Jesuits at Father Ed's office were pointing out to him the connections between the 12 steps and the spiritual exercises. I'm actually going to put in the comments, I'm going to share with you the excerpt from Father Ed, rather than share this with you, because I know our time is limited and I want to have time for questions. But I'm going to share with you the excerpt from Father Ed where I see, I see my screen sharing is paused. Well, that's all right, because I want to message you. So let me stop the share for a moment, and I'm going to message you a link, which actually, here we go, message to everyone. So this is a link to the excerpt from Father Ed where I talk about that visit of Bill to the Queen's work, and I even have an image of what I believe is the chart that was on the wall that Bill said denoted the connections between the 12 steps and the spiritual exercises. I've just a couple more slides to share with you, or I think maybe just 2 more slides. Here, I wanted to try to impress upon you the sort of things that Father Ed said to Bill, and the sort of things that he would have said to you if you were coming to him with any kind of problem. He had these sort of pithy sayings that, they're short and they're kind of simple, but they get to the heart of a philosophy of life that is a happier way of life. So these are some sayings that were recalled by a friend of his who was a fellow newspaper journalist, a Protestant man named Sam Lambert. Sam Lambert remembered that Father Ed would say, big problems seldom are solved by a single gesture, but solve as many small problems as you can. When they arise, the results will build up. He said, success is getting what you want. Happiness is wanting what you get. And he says, God is pleased when you make the first efforts to help yourself. That's very interesting. One criticism that Dr. Bob had of Catholics, and it's a common Protestant criticism of Catholics, is that Catholics are often accused of having an idea of works salvation, where we have to save ourselves through works. And Father Ed, as a good Jesuit, was not someone who believed in work salvation. He believed in a sort of a back and forth where God makes the first move, just as in the steps where we realize that God has to, our higher power has to do something for us to be healed. And at the same time, God, in inviting us, he's making the first move to invite us. He wants us to respond. And with our response begins this wonderful back and forth with God, where we are seeking God's will in our lives, and our higher power will respond. And a big part of Father Ed's philosophy was that these very small things that we think are nothing, that we do, these little daily sacrifices that we make, have a great value to God. That was one of the things that Father Ed wrote to a woman suffering from alcoholism. He wrote, "Do not despise small gains." That's actually a biblical line, that a verse that Father Ed put into his own words. So this is just a taste of the spirituality that Father Ed shared with Bill Wilson, and that Father Ed employed to encourage Bill and to encourage people suffering from alcoholism and any kind of addiction. So you'll find much more in Father Ed, and there's a special discount that you can see here. If you're ordering from North America, you can use that discount code FRE23 at the website of Orbis Books and receive 30% off your order. There are also some some names of distributors here for people in the UK, in the EU, and in Australia. So it's just been a joy giving you a taste of my biography of Father Ed. Thank you.